Just start to.
Yeah, people ask me, how did Boogie get its name? Well, long story short, we had a music store in Mill Valley, and that was mostly a social hang scene because we didn't really make enough money to make a living. I was the repair guy. In fact, that's how we got Prune Music started. Was that an emergency repair? I rebuilt my keyboard player friend's Sun 200 after it went up in flames and smoke, and we were heartbroken. Him especially, because didn't have enough money to buy a new amp and nobody could fix it. And I said, hey, let me take it apart. I messed with ham radio stuff when I was a little kid and see what I can do. Well, I managed to see a big pile of burned up stuff. I went down to an electronics store that actually became Pacific Stereo, which was the forerunner to the Good Guys and Best Buy. But I talked to the very owner. I need a 220K half-watt resistor. I need a 0.22 microfarad 400-volt capacity, blah, blah, blah. So I bought all these parts, and they cost like about 90 cents or so. Put the guy's amp back together, and behold, it worked. And well, he was floored. To me, that was just what you had to do. Just like my car broke about every 2 weeks, and I had to, because it was a British sports car, all charm, no reliability, but you had to be able to fix everything, and we had no money. At any rate, the next day, he says, hey, we're going to open a music store. He could have pushed me over with a feather, because what did we know about a music store in Berkeley in 1966 or 67? And what he said was prophetic, because he said, look, everybody in the Bay Area is playing music, but nobody can fix this gear, and you just did. So, and I found a storefront here on Grove Street for $75 a month, and we can just start by selling off some of our band gear, and that's what we did. It was actually successful in that in a very short time, all of the Bay Area bands were bringing their gear to me and us to be repaired. And that would be, oh man, the Country Joe and the Fish, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, the Sons of Champlin, oh man, and dozens of bands that you never heard, including ours, which was called Martha's Laundry. At any rate, Country Joe and the Fish were a pretty big deal at that time. As a matter of fact, Led Zeppelin actually opened for them in those days. And the guys were really cool. He brought a truckload of equipment and said, we're getting ready to go out on the road, and I need this stuff made bulletproof because it really takes a beating. And as he was saying that, he was opening the back door to their equipment truck, and a Fender Showman head fell out onto the street right there. And he said, see what I mean about the beating? And I took that to heart. And I thought, wow, this stuff really does take a hell of a mechanical beating. So I created the famous hammer test, which is exactly what the name implies. You turn the amp all the way up and you pound on it with a hammer until something breaks, and then you fix that so that won't break again. You pound on it some more, and if something else breaks, you fix that so it won't break anymore, and you continue until the thing is hammer-proof. Now, we still do that on every Mesa Boogie, gets the living daylights hammered out of it. And these guys were cool. Dave Faison, and I can't remember the other cat's name, the two roadies. They weren't called techs in those days. They were roadies. And these were great guys. And at one time they said, hey, is there something you can do to boost this little Fender Princeton practice amp so it just blows Barry Melton's mind? And I said, yeah, love to do it, because the trouble with that little British sports car I had was that the engine was too small. And so what I always fantasized was taking some hot, cool little aluminum V8 and dropping it in. Of course, I never got around to doing it, but I wanted to do the same concept with this Fender Princeton, and that's what I did. We already knew, for example, that the Fender 410 Tweed Bassman was a terrible bass amp, but it was a fabulous blues guitar amp. And we had serial number, I think it was 0004, came through the store. And man, everybody loved that amp. So there, I knew that circuit, and I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip this Fender Princeton bare that I got to hog out the chassis to put this big ass transformer set in it and then rewire and rebuild the whole thing, which is exactly what I did. And then I'm looking at this little punk 10-inch speaker and going, wow, that'll blow out on the third or first note. The hot ticket then was a JBL D120, a great 12-inch guitar speaker. And I looked and I said, like, wow, it looks like it might just barely be possible to actually fit this into this little Princeton practice amp size cabinet. And if I get it turned just right, the transformers will go in between the spokes on the speaker frame, blah, blah, blah. So I did all that. And yeah, and I fired it up on a scope, looked pretty good. It was quiet, it seemed like it worked. So I took it out to the front of our Prune Music store. Now I have to jump ahead. By now, Prune Music was in Mill Valley. We got tired of the whole Berkeley riot nonsense and all of that, and I was finished with going to Cal, Berkeley, the university. I had enough of that. Never took an electronics class. I don't know what I took, but it didn't matter much. At any rate, so I took this little Fender combo, Princeton, out to the front, and one of the guys was hanging around. And I said, hey, Carlos, would you plug into this? And he went, come on, man, that's a Fender. I don't want to plug into that. And I said, no, but I boosted it. You have? Yeah, plug into it. Let me see. Well, I just want to know how it sounds. So he plugs in, and it sounds fabulous. And he's inspired. He's playing like Carlos can do. And we turned it up loud, and it was loud, and it was a beautiful summery day, and the doors were open, and people actually started flocking to the front of the store out on the sidewalk going, wow, what is that? Carlos went off. It sounded great. When he finished, he looked at this little thing sitting on the floor and said, shit, man, that little thing really boogies. So there came that part of the name, and the process of getting your Fender amp boosted was called getting it boogieized. And so that's all we thought about it. Mainly what we did in that store was smoke dope in the back room. And man, every rock star in town, and they were all living in Mill Valley, plus everybody that came to play in San Francisco, the Fillmore, Winterland, and so forth, including the likes of Eric Clapton and you name them. They all came over to our store because we were hip, we were cool, we had all the great old stuff. We called it used gear. Nobody even thought about calling it vintage yet. But for example, you could get a 60s Strat for $165, but if you didn't have that, $150 would get it for you. Gold top Les Paul, $300, no problem. That guitar is yours. And so I boogieized a whole bunch of amps. Then what happened was I remember hearing some kids saying, hey man, I got a Fender Princeton, it's barely adequate for the garage unless the drummer's playing loud. And I see Santana up there, he's headlining the Winterland with his. I don't know what the heck. So then it occurs to me, yeah, this stealth idea is backfiring because everybody still thinks it's just an old stock Fender. So I taught myself the basics of silk screening and laid out the Boogie logo and started attaching those to these amps. So, then it sort of became an official recognition point. Now, the other part of the name, Mesa Engineering, where the heck did that come from? I've often been asked. Well, the income from Prune Music was so paltry, it was not what they call today a living wage. I didn't expect a living wage, geez. So I needed to augment my income and did it with two different ways. And that's where Mesa Engineering came in. One way was jacking up old summer cabins and hand digging a foundation trench around under them and pouring the concrete and then setting the house back down, starting with my own, which was exactly that situation. It was an old summer cabin that was literally falling down, but it was something that I could afford. Yeah, you're going to throw up when you hear this. 2.5 acres with a summer cabin in Marin County for $15,000. That's 15000, 15,000, full price. Okay, you won't see that anymore. Now the other part was rebuilding the engines on Mercedes-Benz. Now, I alluded to that British sports car syndrome. Great fun, totally unreliable, and especially from a little punk kid that's made it as racy as possible with a milled head, a cam, headers, lightened flywheel. I did everything and consequently, as I learned racing later, the more you get out of an engine, the more temperamental and less lifetime it has. So I had plenty of experience rebuilding car engines. And when my neighbor got this old 1959 Mercedes, it had a blown rod bearing in it, and he pulled up in front, and I heard this knock, 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 knock. I go, wow, what is that? I go down there, Bob, shut that off before it blows up. And he did, and he said, yeah, I just got this car for $400, and everywhere I go, they tell me it's going to be $1,100, $1,200 to fix it. And I said, how much did you pay for that car? It looks like it's brand new. And he said, it is, except it's got this horrible noise. He said, I paid $400 for it. And I said, hey, I'll give you $450 cash for it right now. And he said, sold. So I bought that car, and I took the engine out and rebuilt that engine. It cost $75 for the machining. It didn't even need pistons. I remember, I'll never forget the machinist going back and forth and measuring the bore. And he said, son, how old is it? I said, it's got 90,000 miles on it. He said, I can't measure the wear. There is no measurable wear here, but it's just got this blown bearing. So we turned the crank down and bought new bearings and new rings. I put it back together, and man, I got another 100,000 miles out of it. Well, this same neighbor started making a business of buying these old Mercedes and me rebuilding the engines. We did 8 of those. Now, I haven't forgotten where we're going. I couldn't call Mercedes-Benz and say, this is Boogie, and I need a set of main and rod bearings and some, blah, blah. No, they would have hung up on me. Same thing with Shamrock. I need 8 yards of concrete ready mix. Who is this? This is Boogie. So I needed something that sounded legit, right? And at the spur of the moment, I came up with Mesa Engineering. Actually, I was going to call it Marin Engineering, but I waited in line to register that, and finally it got to my turn. I said, Marin Engineering. The lady said, that's been taken. Next. I said, wait, I'm not going to the back and the end of the line. How about Marin? How about Mesa Engineering? She goes, stamp, $75. So there we go. It was Mesa Engineering built the Boogie amp. Well, at that point, the Boogie amp, I would run out of Princeton's because pretty much everyone in the Bay Area I had already boosted. And so we bought a few of them because we were Fender dealers by that time. And I said, this makes no sense to pay the money for a Fender Princeton and then take it apart and throw away everything except the sheet metal chassis and then, hog out that chassis. I'm just going to make my own, which luckily I had learned some basics of when I was a kid doing the ham radio gig, which is kind of what led me to the whole beginning of all of this stuff. So yeah, I started fabricating the chassis, and then it's like, well, I need a nameplate that looks good. Well, okay, I taught myself some basic silk screening. So I went down and got some black acrylic and just using Letraset, sort of rub-on letters. I made the Mesa Engineering logo and on the kitchen table, and I made the Boogie logo, and then I would do the outline and the volume, treble, middle, bass, and all of that stuff. And so I started fabricating the amps. Oh, by the way, this is another little thing. Talk about fabricating. I wanted consistency, and what I thought would be cool was like, well, let me make some printed circuit boards for this. Now, at that time, there was no, point-to-point wiring. It has to be, no, nobody knew anything about any of that stuff yet. So I taught myself how to make printed circuit boards. I already knew the basics of the silk screening, and I already knew the circuits that I wanted. So I laid out, what you do is you lay it out on tape and pads. Then I took it to my crazy artist friend, and he had a arc lamp, and then he could burn a silk screen for me, and then I would silk screen the etch resist. I bought a bunch of ferric chloride, and I made a hot agitating acid bath, and I put the circuit boards in there until they were etched. And then you have to clean them off, and then you have to drill them, then you have to stuff them, then you have to solder them, and so forth. And it actually was not labor savings. It was the opposite of labor savings, but I didn't care. I was just enjoying the process of fabricating, of actually making something. So many funny stories. When people looked at the house by the kitchen table, they said, "What are all of those stains on the wall?" I go, oh yeah, well, that's where I'd be having dinner. And I go, "Oh shit, I've got stuff down there getting etched. Oh man, I got to go grab that." And I'd grab it and bring it up and hose it off so it would stop getting etched. And I'd set it up there. And of course, it ended up staining the wood on the walls and the little deal there. So if you look at that house, you can still see those stains. And those are stains from primordial tone, baby. Okay, so yeah, and of course making the cabinets, and the first ones were the snake skin with the molded bumper all the way around them. It was a really unique look, and again, it was a hell of a lot of labor, way more labor than normal. But I was into the art of it, and just enjoyed the processes and learning the basics again of the sheet metal fabrication, the silk screening process, making a printed circuit board, wiring the thing up, teching it out and getting it to work, getting it quiet, and so forth and so on. Now, along the way, a very important thing happened, and that it led to the discovery of high gain. And we're going to go into that in the next chapter.